Here's a challenge for you. What do a stamp, a coin, so maybe a 5p or a 10p, and a postbox all have in common? That's a tricky one. They all tell us who the Queen is. If we look at a 5p or a 10p coin, it has the Queen's head on it. If we look at a stamp, it has the Queen's head. And if we look at a postbox, many postboxes have the letters E-R, and the E stands for Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth II. Now, another word that is used to describe the Queen is the sovereign. That means that she is in control of our country and a lot of other countries in a group called the Commonwealth. She is described as the sovereign. But there are lots of things that the Queen can't do. For example, she can't control the weather. She can't make sick people well. There are so many things that she can't do because she is human, just like you and I. I'm sure you have now guessed what our word beginning with S is today. God is sovereign, not just over a country or a group of countries, but over all. Now, in this verse that we're going to read, we don't hear the word sovereign, but we hear a little bit about what it means that God is sovereign. 1 Chronicles chapter 29 verses 11 and 12. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. God created all things. He is in control of all things. He is sovereign over all things. In the Bible, we read a story about a lady called Naomi. Naomi and her husband and 2 sons lived in the land of Bethlehem. But in that land there was a terrible famine. There was no food, so they had to move to another country called Moab. While they were in Moab, the 2 sons got married. But something very, very sad happened. Naomi's husband died, and then Naomi's 2 sons died. They were very, very sad. Naomi said to her sons' wives, "You can stay in your own country. I am going back to the country that I came from." But one of the sons' wives, she was called Ruth, and she said to Naomi, "No, I will come with you. Your God will be my God too." So Ruth went with Naomi back to Bethlehem. They were very sad because so many bad things had happened, and it must have been very difficult for Ruth to move to a completely different country after all of that sadness. They were quite poor, and to get enough to eat, Ruth had to go out into the fields where the men were gathering in the grain, and she walked in behind the men gathering the grain and picked up little bits that had been left over. The man who owned the land was a very kind man named Boaz, and he told some of the workers to leave just a little bit extra grain for Ruth to collect. In those days, there were very special rules about who could marry a lady after her husband had died, and those people were called kinsman redeemers. And Boaz was one of the family's kinsman redeemers. And that meant that he could marry Ruth and keep their family line going. And that's exactly what happened. Boaz and Ruth were married, and they had a son called Obed. A few weeks ago, we thought about how God is at work in all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And if we look at the story of Ruth and Naomi, we might think, how could God be working for good in all those bad things that happened? There was a famine, Naomi's husband died, Naomi's 2 sons died, Ruth had to move to a completely different country. How could God be at work in all of those things? It's really amazing whenever we look at the beginning of the New Testament, the book of Matthew. Remember, Ruth's husband was called Boaz, their son was called Obed. At the very beginning of the book of Matthew, we have a really big long list of a family. I'm going to start in the middle. It says, Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. Ruth's son Obed was the grandfather of King David. And as we read on and on and on, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born. All of these awful things happened in the lives of Ruth and Naomi. But God was at work, and God used that family to bring his son, our Saviour and Rescuer, into the world. Isn't that amazing? God is sovereign. He is at work in all things. I learned a new skill this week. And I learned a new skill just so that I would have something different to show you, because I have shown you so many things over this past few weeks that I was really running out of things. So I learned how to cross stitch for the very first time. And this is what I made. What do you think? Isn't it lovely? No, you're right. It's really not that lovely, because look, there's knots and there's big stringy bits and there's tangles. Now, some of the colours are lovely, but all of these bits really aren't. And you see, whenever we look at our lives, sometimes we see the big knots, the difficult times. We see the things that really haven't happened the way we would want them to. We see all the problems. Yes, there are nice things, like the way the colours look quite nice in this, but there are lots and lots of difficult times, and sometimes it's really hard for us to understand what is happening. But we have got to remember that God sees the big picture. God can see the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. If you have trusted Jesus to rescue you from sin, you can know that God is at work in all things for your good and for his glory. You can always trust him.